Welcome back to FRCMedia. Keith Tebow here. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. Ever since COVID-19 and all the number of interviews that we've been able to do with people throughout this time, we tried to spend a lot of time talking about how a lot of our organizations have been able to survive, our nonprofit organizations, many of them doing special fundraisers, others being supported by generosity of individuals. And then there's the SouthCoast Community Foundation, who we spoke to about 2 months ago about how they're pitching in to help our local nonprofits fill the needs and the services of our community. And we're going to get an update today. I'm pleased to be joined by John Vasconcellos from the SouthCoast Community Foundation. John, thanks for joining us again. How are you?
I'm great, Keith. Always a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks for giving us a chance to talk with you.
When we first spoke back in early May, we were talking about how the foundation created the SouthCoast Emergency Response Fund around COVID-19 and helping out other nonprofits and advocacy organizations in our region to help provide the needed services that many people have faced and continue to face. Since we spoke, there has been a lot more that your organization has done to meet the financial needs of those organizations. I think at the time, there were, I believe, 3 awards or 2, soon to be 3 awards. Now we're up to just about double that, right? In terms of the number of awards going out.
We just made our 7th round of grants. That's absolutely right. And we're very excited. I mean, we've raised nearly $5 million in the 3 months that we have been operating the fund. About $2 million of that has come from local residents as well as other foundations throughout the region. And about $3 million has come from our partnership with the Mass COVID Relief Fund, which is chaired by Governor Baker's wife, Lauren Baker. And it's been really a wonderful way to bring philanthropic dollars that often do not find their way down to Fall River and the South Coast region to bring significant amounts. And so just last week, we announced another round. So we've given away a little over $4 million to help local nonprofits as they battle the impacts of COVID.
I know one of the questions I had for you back in May, and I'll have it for you again. How generous has the region been? And we talked about how, you've got other funds that you're continuously collecting for. There's only so much in the till, if you will, from some people. So how generous has our region been?
So you're absolutely right. I mean, there is only so much in the till for some people, but what we're finding is that there's an incredible amount of wealth. Maybe it's not all located in Fall River or in New Bedford, but certainly in the surrounding regions, but certainly for foundations and other families and organizations that like what we're doing down here. So I have been absolutely blown away by the generosity of our community. At least half of the donors that have come to us through this fund are completely new to the Community Foundation. So that clearly tells me a couple of things. One, people are paying attention to what we're doing at the SouthCoast Community Foundation, but also see us, and this is as important, as a really strong partner and knowing the landscape, knowing the nonprofits that need to be supported. One great story is we got a nice size gift. I want to say it was about $5,000 or $10,000 from somebody who I've known in the community for quite some time. And then we do these funders tours where we invite donors and folks who have funds with us to meet some of the nonprofits and the leaders who are doing the work. And we did that early on around some of the initiatives we supported. And I got a call the next day from this person saying, we're going to send you $100,000 for your fund because we just love what you're doing. So I'm not a believer in the finite pie. I'm actually believing that it's a lack of creativity that we have around how to think about building philanthropy, because I think there's a lot out there. We just need to make sure we're getting the message out clearly about what the need is, and 2, about how generosity at any level, it could be $100, it could be $100,000, can absolutely have an impact. We've certainly seen that in the last few months.
I want to get back now to the emergency fund. Some of the organizations that you have funded, I know a lot of it was around food insecurity. Is that still the case? Are those buckets still the same in terms of where that money's going?
Yeah, what we've seen absolutely a continuing need about food insecurity, particularly as the unemployment impact continues. That there are folks who are seeking out food pantries and other distribution networks who never would have imagined that they would have that need, which is why it's really important. And so many organizations have stepped up to be a part of that. But what we're also seeing, and you're going to see that more and more, particularly as the eviction moratorium, ends, is threat of homelessness and housing insecurity and people being able to pay their rent. So the buckets are still very much food. Close behind that is housing, but we're also seeing issues around mental health. I mean, one of the grants that we made recently that I am so excited about is to the Samaritans of Fall River, and the escalation in the number of phone calls they're getting. And a lot of it has to do with suicide. A lot of it just has to do with people needing to talk with somebody. But our ability to support that work so that they can actually be there for when our residents and our local and members of our family need someone who can listen is really critically important. And then the other aspect is the impact in our immigrant community. As we know, we have documented and undocumented folks in this community, and it's critically important that we take care of everybody who's here. And so we've had some amazing organizations step up to the plate. SARE Jobs for Progress is certainly one of them. Immigrant Assistance Center, CCT, doing really phenomenal work reaching out. So the big buckets remain the same, but the longer this goes on, the impact is going to be felt throughout a variety of issue areas.
How many times have you had to look at those buckets and have to, add another bucket to it, and just because of changes and what's been happening? I guess my follow-up would be, and I may have asked you this last time, how long can this fund be sustainable in some ways?
Yeah, and that is the tough question, because as I mentioned, we've raised about 5. We've given about 4. We are about to do another round in the next 2 weeks, which will be our 8th round of grants. And then I actually have a meeting tomorrow, because these grants are all determined by a committee of local residents and other volunteers that help us make these determinations. And tomorrow, if we have this conversation, let's say on Friday, I'd have a lot more information, because tomorrow we're going to hit the pause button and say, okay, we've got about $1 million in the kitty. What are we thinking about? Because we all know this isn't going away tomorrow. The impact on these nonprofits is going to be well into 2021, if not beyond that. So we want to be responsible. While we've been able to be really generous up front on some emergency needs, we want to keep some of our powder dry. So we're looking at things. So for instance, summer programming, a lot of that has been cut back. And the expenses on that, how many kids you can have at a camp, and how many, the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club, and how they're able to provide that. And knowing that these nonprofits are having their own challenges fundraising, what can we do to help out with some of that? We're also looking at childcare. When people start going back to work, the need to have childcare is going to be really important. And a lot of those smaller businesses were not able to stay afloat. And that's a critical part of that. So we're looking at a specific area of grants around those two. And then we're looking long term. And I'm really excited about this, because it's a partnership that we have with about 12 other community foundations from throughout the Commonwealth. And we're all talking about, how do we as a group come together, put some funds together, and bring in some technical expertise and some, absolutely some grant making, but also some shared resources. Because what's the challenges in the Berkshires and the challenges up in Essex County or in Greater Boston on Cape Cod are not dissimilar from what's happening in Fall River and New Bedford and Brockton. And so we're thinking, by coming together as a group, we can be much more strategic and have a longer view. So the fund has longevity, although we're still absolutely encouraging donations. You can go to southcoastcf.org and click on COVID-19 to make a gift. We would love to see that. And we're going to continue to fundraise around that. But again, part of it has to be, we need to be able to demonstrate about what that impact is. And now that we've gone through what we think is the real emergency response, we need to look more long term.
Speaking of Community Foundation and your name, I was telling you before we started that, I've wanted to do an update on the Emergency Response Fund. And then I noticed that the organization changed its name since 2 months ago. Formerly the Community Foundation of Southeastern Massachusetts, now the SouthCoast Community Foundation. Why the name change, and was this something that was in the works prior to COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of people have said, how have you found the time to do this? We did.
Exactly.
This work was done at the end of last year and formalized legally at the early part of this year. And we had always planned to use our annual meeting, which was last Tuesday, as the formal announcement, because we wanted our website, we wanted the new logo, we wanted all that stuff set up so that it was ready to go the moment we announced it at the annual meeting. And then the pandemic happened. It's like, well, we're going to go ahead and do that. I mean, that said, we knew it was exciting, new news, but you know, it's not such a big deal for us to change our name when there are other issues that we're dealing with, COVID-19, issues around racial equity, but we wanted to make sure the name got out there. So it's been a long time coming, really driven by the board that realized in the last 4 years, we've really elevated what the organization is doing, the potential of the organization and the momentum. And so we said, let's, you know, the Community Foundation of Southeastern Massachusetts is a mouthful. And it's like, how can we become more current, more relevant, pithier? And we looked into it, and we had a lot of different examples and looked at a bunch of different names. South Coast, because you've got the hospital group, you got the media group, now you have the chambers. So it's probably not that unusual, but it absolutely, from our perspective, speaks to an energy and an aspiration and a momentum. And I think this is critically important for those of us who are lifelong residents on the South Coast. It is self-defining. It's how we call ourselves, right? It is not relative to some other part of the state or relative to Boston. South Coast is a name that we have embraced, that we have all created. And so it makes sense that the spirit and the energy and enthusiasm we have around the Community Foundation should absolutely reflect that. And we couldn't be more excited about the response we've gotten, which has been just terrific.
You know, you mentioned how South Coast. I remember when that name started floating around in our region, and people were saying, well, we're not South Coast, we're Southeastern Massachusetts. And then, as you said, it's become now the accepted moniker for a number of organizations and operations in our region. One final thing I want to get to as well is heading into, you know, late summer and going into fall. Schools are starting again. And I mentioned to you, you know, prior to our talk here today that I was really moved, and hopefully others were as well. You can see it online, on social media and the like. The Community Foundation's annual awarding of scholarships to college students, and sort of how you did it this year, a little bit different than years past, right?
Yeah, we did. I mean, historically, we love the fact that we have a couple of different receptions that bring students and their families together, and we get to celebrate and we announce, you know, $450,000 that'll be invested in our young folks' future. But this time we actually, when the staff realized they weren't going to be able to do that in person, they came up with a brilliant idea where we would tell these kids, a little disingenuous, that we needed to interview them and we'd like to have their family or their parents join them because we had a couple more questions. When in fact, I would get on a Zoom call, not unlike this, and the setting is the same, my dining room. And we'd say, well, actually, we don't have any questions for you. We actually are here to tell you we're giving you, and then we would tell them the scholarships we're getting. And the reactions, I mean, Keith, to your point, they are so true and sincere and hopeful. And I got to tell you, in this day and age, we all need a heck of a lot more of that. And it is an 8-minute video that I will tell your listeners, you will not find anything on the internet more inspiring than these 8 minutes. The fact that I'm in it aside, because you see the future of our community and how enthusiastic these folks are, because people who they will never know, believed in them and created permanent scholarships at the Community Foundation to allow them to live their dreams. And I got to tell you, you know, there are days where I joke, I said, you know, I get to play Santa Claus. This really was that moment, and it's a wonderful opportunity. So I really appreciate you pointing that out.
Well, and I want to again thank you for joining us, giving us an update today, John. We'll touch base again soon, and hopefully we'll be talking about other projects as well that the Community Foundation is undertaking. John Vasconcellos of the SouthCoast Community Foundation, thank you for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Keith. Bye-bye.
And I want to thank you for joining us today on this Wednesday afternoon. And thank again, John Vasconcellos from the SouthCoast Community Foundation for joining us. I'm Keith Tebow. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk again soon.